Oh, hell, Internet. It's time to continue now with the Book of Master Mo. I'm still a little bit sick, so please bear with me. The next chapter, chapter 32, is Condemning Music 1. The later two versions of this chapter have been lost, and that title is not just hyperbole. Mo is absolutely against music as an idea. His reasons are coherent, but ultimately I will fall down on this being Mo showing his neurosis to some extent, as his extreme asceticism has sometimes demonstrated before. Also, there's a certain anti-Confucianist theme running through this idea as well. But let's go through. 32.1. Master Mo spoke, saying, "The business of those who are Ren must be to seek diligently to promote what benefits the world and eliminate what harms it, so that they will be deemed models for the world. If they are benefiting people, they act. If they are not benefiting people, they stop. Furthermore, those who are Ren in making their plans for the world don't make what is beautiful to their eyes or pleasing to their ears or sweet to their palates or of comfort to their bodies. They take these things as depriving the people of materials for food and clothing. And so, those who are Ren don't make them." 32.2. For this reason, Master Mo's condemnation of music is not because he thinks the sounds of the struck bell and beaten drum and of lutes and pipes are not pleasing. It is not because he thinks the colours of inlays and patterns are not beautiful. It is not because he thinks the flavours of the broiled meats of grass and grain-fed animals are not sweet. It is not because he thinks dwellings with high towers, large pavilions, and secluded courtyards are not comfortable. Although the body knows their comforts, the mouth their sweetness, the eyes their beauty, and the ears their music, nevertheless, when we examine these things in terms of the high, they do not accord with the business of the sage kings. And when we evaluate them in terms of the low, they do not accord with the benefits of the 10,000 people. That is why Master Mo said, making music is to be condemned. 32.3. Nowadays, kings, dukes, and great officers make musical instruments, taking it to be the business of the state. But this is not a simple matter like collecting water or digging earth. They will certainly have to levy heavy taxes from the 10,000 people to make the sounds of the struck bell and the beaten drum, and of lutes and pipes. In ancient times, the sage kings also levied heavy taxes from the 10,000 people to make boats and carts, and when they were completed they asked themselves, where will we use these things? The boats we will use on water, and the carts on land. They said, so noble men can rest their feet, and lesser men can rest their shoulders and backs. Therefore, the 10,000 people brought forth their goods and presented them, and dared not resent it. Why? Because in return the things gained were in accord with the benefits of the people. In this case then, if musical instruments gave back something that was in accord with the benefits of the people, like this, then I would not dare condemn them. That is to say, if there was some proper use for musical instruments like that of the sage kings, use of boats and carts, then I would not dare condemn them. So there's a lot going on here. First of all, we see Mo's utilitarian streak. Obviously, he was one of the earliest utilitarian thinkers in the East or West, but he takes it to this extremely ascetic level, and it's all about utility for him. And I'm not sure I take his point completely. They would certainly have to levy taxes, heavy taxes from the people to make the sounds of the struck bell, etc. You can make plenty of simple musical instruments. That's not impossible at all. And indeed, the people also find benefit in music, and they will make many simple musical instruments. So that is also somewhere where I'm not sure that Mo is on the right track. He says that the kings, dukes, and great officers take making instruments to be the business of the state. Confucianism was not a dominant philosophy at this time in China, but certainly in Confucianism, much is made of the comparison, the metaphor between human affairs and music. Confucius saw that it was important to try and create harmonies in human affairs as one would create harmonies in a piece of music that one is creating, and saw there was a certain parity between the two. I do not claim to know either way, but Mo is obviously very much against this idea, does not believe that this is significant at all, and condemns music utterly on that basis. So I alluded to the idea that the people do benefit from music. Let's look at how in 32.4. The people have 3 hardships: to be hungry and not find food, to be cold and not find clothing, to be weary and not find rest. These 3 things are great hardships for the people. If this is so, then suppose we strike the great bells, beat the sounding drums, strum lutes, blow pipes, and brandish shields and battle axes. Will this enable people to find the materials for food and clothing? I certainly don't think this will ever be so. Very, very dismissive there. But clearly, those 3 hardships that Mo outlines are genuine hardships, and arguably the most important hardships. But if we draw inspiration from something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, once those things have been satisfied, in order for people to become actualized, there is a need for something more, a need for a certain soul satisfaction. And that is, I think, what Mo very much misses about music and what it can give to the human experience. Back in those times where much more of daily life was directed towards the production of subsistence and the marshalling of the nascent state, okay, I can understand why you might take a view that frivolous things are less significant. However, I find it hard to believe that the power of music, the ability for music to create feelings in people, whether those be the noble people or the masses, could not have been unnoticed by people at that time, and particularly by Mo, unless he is, as I suspect, really showing his neurosis here. Every human being escapes adolescence with their own little bag of neurosis. This is a cast iron fact about humanity, and perhaps the reason for many of our serious failings. And this, I think, is one of Mo's. He completely overlooks a whole aspect of human experience in condemning music. And it must be as a result of something in his upbringing or earlier life that has just fossilized this contempt for the idea of music, in my opinion. Mo could come back and say, no. The spiritual content, the soul satisfaction, is already sort of applied in the worship of heaven's intention and ghosts and spirits of the middle realm. And it is through doing those things that one actually finds the satisfaction and the spiritual fulfillment that one can get out of life. And okay, I mean, if that's what he believes, fair enough. But at the end of the day, I've already sort of laid out why I don't think that that is the case. And like I say, I still don't believe he can't observe the ability to move us that music so clearly has. So yes, I am skeptical at this point. A lot of what's left is about different ways to condemn music, and there's some interesting points raised. We'll go through it. I'll try and not go too long, though, because it could, as you might have noticed, get a little repetitive. 32.5. But let us put this aside for the moment. Nowadays, there are large states attacking small states. There are large households striking at small. The strong plunder the weak, the many tyrannize the few, cunning deceive the foolish, noble or arrogant towards the lowly, and so on and so forth. And disorder, theft, and plunder all arise and cannot be stopped. If we strike the great bells, beat the sounding drums, and so on, will this enable good order to be imposed on the disorder of the world? I certainly don't think so. This is why Master Mo said, as before, imposing heavy taxes on the 10,000 people in order to make the sounds of the great bell, the sounding drum, and so on, do not help in seeking to promote the world's benefits and eliminate the world's harms. This is why Master Mo said, making music is to be condemned. And you can see at the end of all of these sections, there is this mantra. This is why Master Mo said, making music is to be condemned. It's very floral. It's very biblical in the way that it kind of creates these repetitive themes that are supposed to drum the idea firmly into your head as you read them, and for you to treat it with the necessary level of gravitas that is important for taking on board a new, deeply held opinion. The fact that the Book of Master Mo was only compiled into a text in the sort of Middle Ages time, in sort of 12 to 1300, is indicative, I suppose, that whoever did the compilation had the agenda of attempting to reintroduce the ideas of Mohism into the popular mindset. Clearly that didn't pan out, but I think that must have been his intention. I say his intention. We can assume it was a he, but who knows? And so he certainly didn't take any pains to remove any of this floral, repetitive language that Mo uses. And I think it does benefit the text as a whole in trying to sound like this kind of holy text that is conveying deep and transcendent truths about the world. 32.6. Nowadays, kings, dukes, and great officers, when they sit up in their high towers and large pavilions and look at the bells, they seem just like upturned tripods. If no one strikes them, how will they get any music from them? Clearly, for their pleasure, they need someone to strike them. But for striking the bells, they certainly will not use those who are old and young. In the case of the old and the young, their ears and eyes are not sharp and keen, and their arms and legs are not quick and strong. So the sounds are not harmonious, and the tones won't change appropriately. They will undoubtedly use those in their prime, because their ears and eyes are sharp, and so on and so on. If they use men to do this, it will interfere with the time for sowing grain and planting seeds. If they use women to do this, it will interfere with their work of spinning and weaving. So now, if kings, dukes, and great officers make music, the depleting and depriving people of the materials for clothing and food in order to make music will, in this way, be very great. This is why Master Mo said, making music is to be condemned. I don't see that this is particularly compelling either. There are plenty of old and young musicians. You might make arguments in some cases, particularly that of dance. Dance might benefit from using those in their prime. And if those do need to be the very best they can be, maybe a few of them will be removed from the pool of manual workers. Mo seems to be assuming that any removal of people from the working population is detrimental to the standard of living among the people in general. And again, trivially, this is correct, I suppose. Technically, it's correct. One less person doing productive work will lead to slightly less surplus being produced overall, assuming that every single individual of the population is being perfectly applied in the way that their productivity is marshaled. But I don't think we can assume that either. 32.7 is quite similar. Now, if the great bell, the sounding drum, etc., are already prepared, and a great officer reverentially plays them and listens to it alone, what pleasure will he get? If his enjoyment is not with lowly men, then it must be with noblemen. But if he listens to the music with noblemen, that prevents them from attending to administration. And if he listens to music with lowly men, that prevents them from carrying out their work. So now, if kings, dukes, and great officers make music and depleting and depriving people of materials and clothing and food will, in this way, be very great. This is why Master Mo said, making music is to be condemned. So very similar, but now it's the people who play music, even if they are the noblemen of the state who would not be working in the fields anyway. If they play it for other noblemen, then they prevent the administrative duties from being carried out. If they play it for lowly men, they will prevent the everyday manual labor of the state from being carried out. And if they listen to it alone, apparently there's no pleasure to be gained whatsoever. Again, clearly a little bit over the top here. If you play music alone, you can get pleasure from the feelings that you have of competence, and you can appreciate the music for yourself. As for the others, again, technically true that you remove people from the working population if you give them time to play music. But what, is Mo suggesting that all leisure time at all is a waste of time? I mean, that seems a little bit over the top for sure. 32.8, here we go with dancers. In former times, Duke Kang of Qi took pleasure in the Wan dance, but he did not allow the musicians and dancers to wear coarse clothing or eat poor quality food. He said that if their food and drink were not excellent, their appearance and countenance would not be good enough to look at, and if their clothes and garments were not excellent, their bodies and bearing would be ugly and emaciated, and not good to look at. So their food had to be millet and meat, and their clothes had to be patterned and embroidered. Such people never themselves worked to produce the materials for clothing and food, but always relied on others for their food. It was for this reason, and again, the mantra about depriving people of the resources for clothing and food, this is why Master Mo said, making music is to be condemned. So yeah, I mean, here you can see something a little bit closer to a coherent point. And I think it gets to the idea that really what Mo is arguing against in this section is excess. That's what he really is opposed to, is the excess in any kind of frivolous activity being the things that don't contribute to the marshalling of resources and the stability of the state. And, you know, again, in that time when there was no kind of, shall we say, artist class or artisan class of people who could literally afford to take their whole lives to focus on a apparently frivolous exercise, you could argue that maybe some of these examples, you know, like the dancers who have to be wear embroidered clothes and eat the finest food, it does seem a little bit gauche and a little bit obnoxious. You know, when you will definitely go and find people living in poverty, presumably a handful of miles from the place where this happened. So, you know, here I think maybe there are some genuine examples of excess that Mo witnessed during his time. And this is one of the things that has turned him off to the idea of music, dance, and art, essentially, as a worthy occupation, and why it needs to be condemned. I'm actually going to skip 32.9 and 32.10, where Mo essentially again makes the point that people have their allotted tasks, allotted by heaven's intention, and music inevitably interferes with those allotted tasks. It's a very similar point that he's made before. So getting to the end, 32.11, how do we know this to be so? I say it is through the writings of the former kings. Tang's official punishments has this to say: frequent dancing in a dwelling is spoken of as witchcraft. In the case of a nobleman, the penalty is 2 rolls of silk. In the case of a lesser man, this is doubled. Why? The great oath says, alas, how much dancing there is, how many sounds there are, clear and sharp. The Supreme Lord does not honor him. The 9 regions will be lost. The Supreme Lord is displeased and will send down on him 100 calamities. His household will certainly be damaged and destroyed. If we examine the reason for the loss of the 9 regions, it is nothing other than elaborate music. In the Wu Guan, it says, Qi's son, Wu Guan, gave himself to excess and dissipation. He ate and drank in the open fields, jiang jiang, huang huang, the pipes, the chimes sounded in harmony. He gave himself up to wine. The whole day he feasted and wandered. There were the ordered movements of the one dance, and the sounds rose to heaven. But heaven took this to be a transgression of the rule. Thus, above it transgressed the rule of heaven and of ghosts, and below it brought no benefit to the 10,000 people. So once again, we see it's not music per se, it's not art per se that Mo is truly condemning, it is excess, although he doesn't acknowledge this himself. And like I say, I really do think that this whole chapter is a touch of Mo's neurosis spilling through into his philosophical structure. I think the idea that music is so harmful that it needs to be condemned is a clear overreaction. Even if you do take some of the points about, it distracting from people's allotted tasks, which you can do, and obviously the examples of excess that we've discussed, certainly there is the possibility, especially in that earlier agricultural time, that excess has clear negative effects on the benefits to the people, to the masses. But just to simply say that therefore music should be condemned out of hand, I think this is clearly wrong. And then there is a final mantra to repeat the essential thesis statement. This is why Master Mo said, nowadays, if the world's officers and noblemen genuinely wish to promote the world's benefits and eliminate its harms, then in regard to such a thing as music, they cannot but prohibit and prevent it. It's absolutely clear. And again, it has this kind of sense of ending a biblical passage with a transcendent truth about the world, which anyone must observe if they are interested in virtue and eliminating the world's harms. So yes, that is my thoughts on the Book of Mo, condemning music. And I've been fairly negative about the last 3, haven't I? Heaven's Intention, Percipient Ghosts, and Condemning Music. I'm pretty much against Mo on all of these. Although, of course, there is a cultural distance and a temporal distance to consider. And I've tried to do that wherever I can. But please let me know, especially if you are familiar with the Book of Mo, in the comments, what you think of these thoughts of mine. But thank you very much for watching, and bye for now.